Nobody in this building tells me no. The voice hit the trauma floor so hard that even the monitors seemed to shrink for a second. Nurses looked up. A resident froze with a chart in his hand. A janitor stopped beside the double doors and quietly moved aside. In the middle of the hallway stood Ayanna Brooks, 8 months pregnant, one hand resting on her stomach, the other holding a patient file. She had spent 12 years inside St. Matthew's Regional. She knew the sound of panic, grief, and hope disappearing in real time. But arrogance had its own sound, sharper, colder, practiced. The man in front of her wore a charcoal suit too expensive for a place that smelled like antiseptic and fear. His shoes were mirror black. His cufflinks flashed under the emergency lights. His name was Gideon Voss, real estate billionaire, hospital donor, collector of favors, destroyer of people who forgot how powerful he was. He had arrived with 2 private security guards and a woman crying beside him, mascara running, clutching the hand of a teenage boy with a cast on his wrist. The boy was in pain, yes, but he was breathing fine, stable, awake, angry. He did not need the last monitored ICU step-down room on the floor. A 6-year-old girl did. Ayanna's voice stayed level. The room is already assigned. Gideon stepped closer. Reassign it. I can't do that. He laughed without humor. You can't, or you won't. Behind Ayanna, a monitor above bed 12 gave a soft alarm and settled again. Little Naomi Reed was on the other side of that wall, a child with a failing heart, post-op complications, oxygen support, and a mother who had not slept in 2 days. Ayanna had personally fought to keep Naomi from being transferred to a lower priority unit because the child kept crashing without warning. She knew Naomi's mother by name. She knew the girl's favorite cartoon. She knew how fast the color left her lips when her oxygen dipped. So Ayanna looked Gideon Voss in the eye and said, "No child loses a bed because somebody wealthy wants a faster hallway." Silence moved through the unit like cold water. One of Gideon's guards shifted. The crying woman whispered, "Gideon, just stop." But men like Gideon never stop because somebody asks. They stop when consequences arrive, and until then, they mistake restraint for permission. He studied her now, really seeing her. A black woman in scrubs, hospital ID around her neck, hair pulled back, tired eyes, steady posture. 8 months pregnant and still standing between him and what he wanted. "Who exactly do you think you are?" he asked. Ayanna answered without raising her voice, "The nurse who decides where this patient goes." The slap came so fast, most people heard it before they believed it. It cracked across the corridor and snapped Ayanna's face sideways. Her shoulder hit the nurse's station. The chart dropped from her hand. For one horrible second, she lost her balance, and both palms flew to her stomach before anything else. Around her, somebody gasped. Somebody cursed. A resident stepped forward, then stopped when one of the guards blocked him with a look. Naomi's mother covered her mouth in the doorway. Ayanna did not cry. That was what people remembered later. Not the suit, not the watch, not even the slap. They remembered that the pregnant nurse who had just been hid in front of half the floor straightened slowly, touched her cheek, and stood there with a silence so controlled it made everyone else ashamed of their fear. Then the administrator arrived. Not security, not police, not anyone useful. Dr. Leon Mercer, chief operating officer of the hospital, came down the hall already sweating. His tie was crooked. His smile was fake. He took one look at Gideon Voss and transformed. His spine bent, his face softened, his tone became almost apologetic. "Mr. Voss," he said, "I'm sure this is a misunderstanding." Ayanna stared at him. Her cheeks still burned. Her baby had kicked hard, startled by the impact. She could feel her pulse in her throat. Gideon adjusted his cuff. "Your employee just obstructed care." Ayanna turned to Mercer. "He struck me." Mercer did not look at her first. He looked at Gideon, then the guards, then the woman beside them, then the witnesses, who lowered their eyes because they knew exactly what kind of man Leon Mercer was. Only after the calculation finished behind his face did he look at Ayanna. "Come with me," he said. "No," Ayanna replied. "Call the police." Mercer's jaw tightened. "Now, Ms. Brooks." The room went smaller. Ayanna looked around at the people who had seen everything. The resident, the orderly, Naomi's mother, a new nurse on orientation who looked close to fainting. None of them spoke. Not because they were cruel people, because they were tired people. People with rent, debt, children, and fear. Powerful men rarely have to silence a room themselves. They just make sure everyone already understands the price of telling the truth. Ayanna bent down, picked up the chart, and followed Mercer to his office. The walk felt longer than it was. She passed families holding paper cups and impossible hope. She passed a vending machine with one flickering light. She passed the chapel, half open and empty. By the time Mercer closed the office door behind them, Ayanna could already feel that deep, instinctive dread that comes when your body knows your life is about to be made harder by someone who will call it policy. Mercer stayed behind his desk. He did not ask if she was hurt. He did not ask if the baby was okay. He did not offer her a chair. "You should have de-escalated," he said. Ayanna blinked once. "He hit me." "He's under extreme stress." "He assaulted me." Mercer exhaled like she was being difficult on purpose. "Mr. Voss is responsible for the East Wing expansion. He funds 3 fellowship programs and our pediatric imaging unit. These situations require tact." Ayanna could taste bitterness at the back of her mouth. A 6-year-old child needed that bed. "That is not the point." "No," she said quietly. "It's exactly the point." Mercer slid a paper across the desk. "Administrative suspension pending review." For a second, Ayanna thought she had misread it. Her cheek still stung. Her baby shifted under her ribs. And there on the desk was a piece of paper informing her that she was being removed from duty while the hospital investigated the incident. "You're suspending me?" "I'm protecting the hospital." Ayanna let out one tired laugh. "From what? A witness?" Mercer lowered his voice. "Take the suspension, go home, and let this cool down. You're close to maternity leave anyway. Don't force this into something bigger than it has to be." Something in Ayanna's expression changed then. Not because she was beaten, because she understood. This was not panic. This was a decision. There were donors and employees, people who mattered and people who did not. In Mercer's world, justice was a luxury item, and Gideon Voss paid for better options. Ayanna folded the paper once and slipped it into her scrub pocket. "You're right," she said. "This is bigger than you think." Then she walked out. Before she reached the elevator, dizziness hit. She grabbed the rail and breathed through it. An older nurse named Denise rushed over with tears already in her eyes. "Baby, sit down." "I'm fine." "You are not fine." Ayanna finally sat. Denise checked her pupils like instinct had taken over from thought. Another nurse brought water. Someone called OB. In the middle of all that quiet kindness, Ayana's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Take the settlement and stay quiet. No signature, no explanation. It did not need one. She stared at the message, then deleted it. The obstetrics resident cleared her an hour later. No labor, no bleeding. Blood pressure elevated from stress. Rest and return immediately if anything changed. Ayana listened, thanked everyone, and left the hospital, carrying a plastic bag with her lunch container, cardigan, and the suspension paper folded so many times it felt like a blade in her pocket. Rain had started by the time she reached the parking deck. Thin, cold rain that made the city look unfinished. She unlocked her car and sat behind the wheel without starting it. For the first time all day, nobody needed her to be composed. Nobody needed professional. Nobody needed brave. The windshield fogged slowly, and Ayana pressed both hands to her face and cried exactly once. Then her phone rang. Private number. She almost ignored it, then answered. A woman's voice, smooth and legal, said, "Ms. Brooks, this is counsel representing parties interested in an amicable resolution. We can arrange a confidential payment if you agree not to discuss today's misunderstanding publicly." Ayana closed her eyes. He slapped me. A pause. Paper shifting. Would you like me to repeat the offer? Ayana hung up. She drove home through rain and blurred taillights, one hand on the wheel and the other low on her stomach, as if she could physically shield the life inside her from a world that rewarded the wrong people. Her apartment building came into view just after dusk, brick faded, security light flickering. She climbed the stairs slowly and found an envelope taped to her door. Notice of lease review. Inside was a letter from management, informing her that due to upcoming property restructuring, her lease would not be renewed at the end of the month. Ayana read it twice, then a third time. She had never paid late, never caused trouble. But the company that owned the building had recently been acquired by a larger real estate group. Ayana understood enough now to know how power moved. It did not have to kick your door down. It just had to tighten enough small spaces around you until breathing felt expensive. Inside the apartment, the nursery corner she had set up in the living room looked suddenly fragile. Folded blankets, a second-hand crib, tiny socks in a basket from clearance. She stood there with her keys still in her hand and felt the first real wave of fear hit her. Not for herself, for the baby. For the possibility that next month she would be recovering from birth with no job, no insurance, no lease, and a man rich enough to erase her from a system with one phone call. On the fridge, under a magnet shaped like a peach, was a card she had not touched in nearly 3 years. One name, one number. Malik Kane. Ayana looked at it for a long time. Then she turned away. 3 hours later, her bank app locked her out. She tried again. Password error. She reset it. The reset failed. Then came the email. Temporary freeze due to unusual activity. Please contact fraud services. Another message followed from payroll. Your direct deposit could not be verified. A third came from HR, requesting she surrender hospital property before final benefit review. Final benefit review. Not suspension. Final. Ayana sat on the edge of her bed and stared at her phone. There it was, the next move. Fast, efficient, polished. Gideon Voss had not wanted silence. He wanted ruin. Silence was just a bonus. At 11:14 p.m., Ayana finally took the card off the fridge and dialed the number. It rang once. Are you safe? The man asked. No hello, no surprise, No hesitation. Ayana swallowed. You knew I'd call? I knew you wouldn't unless it was bad. For a moment she could not speak. Malik Kane had been many things in her life. Foster brother, biggest argument, emergency contact once. The boy who left home at 19 with 2 duffel bags and a face that had already learned how to hide anger beneath calm. The man who later became a name whispered in boardrooms and courtrooms when companies collapsed overnight and corrupt men stopped sleeping. He did not run gangs. He did not run politics. He ran exposure, numbers, debt, acquisitions, silent corrections. Men like Gideon thought power belonged to whoever shouted loudest. Malik belonged to the category of men who never had to shout. Ayana said, "He hit me." The line went quiet. Then Malik asked, "Hospital?" "Yes." "Witnesses?" "Yes." "Did you fall?" "No." "And the baby?" "I'm okay." Another pause. When Malik spoke again, his voice had flattened into something colder than anger. "Send me everything." "Malik, I'm not calling because I need revenge." "I know." "I need this to stop." "That," he said, "is exactly why you called me." She texted him the suspension notice, the lease letter, screenshots of the bank freeze, the anonymous text, the legal call time, the floor where it happened, and the name Gideon Voss. 2 minutes later, Malik replied with 4 words. "Do not answer anyone." That night, Ayana barely slept. The baby moved often, as if disturbed by her fear. Around 3, she made tea she never drank. Around 4, she refolded already folded onesies. At 5, she sat by the window watching delivery trucks crawl through wet streets below. It felt impossible that somewhere out there, Gideon Voss might be sleeping peacefully in a penthouse while her entire life had been shoved to the edge in less than 12 hours. At 6:07 a.m., her phone buzzed. Administrative review postponed. Do not contact staff. At 6:11, another message. Your building ownership has changed. Previous lease notice sent in error. Please disregard. At 6:14, a third. Fraud flag cleared. Account access restored. Then came a 4th text from Malik. Check the news. Ayana opened the first headline and felt the air leave her body. Voss Urban Capital faces federal inquiry over charity fund diversions. A second article loaded. Major lenders freeze credit facilities linked to Gideon Voss Enterprises. Then a third. Whistleblower video alleges donor pressure inside St. Matthew's Regional. Ayana sat down very slowly. The story was beginning to move, and she had not even seen Malik yet. By 8 o'clock, Chicago financial media had turned into a feeding frenzy. Analysts talked about cross-collateralized debt, suspicious land transfers, donor shell foundations, and missing compliance documents. One outlet reported that a merger tied to Voss Urban Capital had been delayed after emergency filings appeared before dawn. Another claimed a sealed complaint had been delivered to regulators and a state attorney's office overnight, complete with banking records and board communications. Ayana knew better than to think all that came from anger alone. Malik never moved because he was angry. He moved because he had already mapped the floor. At 9:22, he called. "Can you meet me?" "Where?" "Front room at Marrow House, 10:30. A black sedan arrived outside her building at 10 sharp. Inside waited a bottle of water, a folded gray coat, and a note in Malik's handwriting. You should not have to arrive looking shaken. Ayana almost laughed, then almost cried. Marrow House smelled like cedar, leather, and expensive secrets. A hostess led Ayana past a fireplace taller than her apartment ceiling into a private room lined with dark glass. Malik was already there by the window, tablet in one hand, coffee in the other. He looked taller than she remembered, or maybe just harder. Dark suit, no tie, no unnecessary jewelry. He turned when she entered, and for a second his face softened back into the brother who once walked her home through rain carrying her science project. Then he saw the fading print on her cheek. The softness vanished. "I'm okay," Ayana said before he could ask. Malik nodded once, but his eyes did not agree. "Sit." She sat. "What did you do?" He placed the tablet in front of her. Security footage from Trauma Hall C, time-stamped, crystal clear, multiple angles. Gideon closing distance, Ayana holding position. The slap, the recoil, the administrator arriving. Everyone visible. No ambiguity, no deniability. Ayana inhaled sharply. "How did you get this?" "I didn't get it," Malik said. "I preserved it before somebody erased it." He tapped again. Internal hospital emails appeared on the screen. Mercer, a board member. Donor relations. Legal. One message, sent less than 12 minutes after the incident, read, "Keep the footage off standard archive until we speak to Voss Council." Another answered, "Understood." Ayana felt sick. They were going to bury it. They tried. Malik leaned back. Gideon Voss is not just a donor. He's leveraged against 3 redevelopment contracts, one of which used charitable tax shelter funds routed through his hospital foundation. He's overdue on covenants that stayed quiet because people he paid kept them quiet. Last night, those people discovered silence had become a worse investment. Ayana looked up. "You destroyed him overnight?" Malik's expression stayed calm. "No. I accelerated what was already breaking." Then he slid one more document toward her. A letter from St. Matthew's restoring her employment immediately, with pay, pending a formal apology and independent review. Unsigned. Ayana did not touch it. "That isn't enough," Malik said. So I didn't stop there. At that exact moment, the door opened. Leon Mercer walked in. But he was not the same man from yesterday. Yesterday, he had the confidence of borrowed power. Today, he looked gray around the mouth. His tie was gone. His hands were empty. He stopped when he saw Ayana and seemed to understand that private consequences were more dangerous than public anger. "Ms. Brooks," he began, "I'd like to sincerely—" Malik did not raise his voice. Not to her. To the truth. Mercer swallowed. Malik gestured toward the chair opposite them. "Sit." What followed was not loud, and that made it devastating. Malik asked short questions. Mercer answered because he had run out of options. Yes, he had received a call from Voss Council before the police report could be filed. Yes, donor relations pressured risk management. Yes, someone attempted to flag Ayana as unstable in internal notes. Yes, HR had been told to convert suspension into separation if she spoke publicly. Yes, footage suppression was discussed. Yes, an NDA had been drafted before midnight. Ayana listened without blinking. Some betrayals do not break your heart. They clarify it. When Mercer finally stopped speaking, Malik placed a document in front of him. "Sign the statement." Mercer went pale. "If I do this, I'm finished." Malik's face did not change. "You were finished when you protected a slap over a child's bed." Mercer signed. At noon, Gideon Voss tried to hold a press conference. It lasted 4 minutes. He stood behind microphones outside Voss Urban Capital headquarters, jaw tight, eyes sleepless, insisting false allegations were being weaponized against a respected businessman during a difficult family situation. He called it a smear, extortion, an attempt to undermine philanthropy. Then a reporter asked why 3 lenders had frozen his company's credit line. Another asked why his foundation's books showed grant disbursements to an address matching one of his shell development firms. A third asked whether he had struck a pregnant nurse on camera inside a trauma ward. The blood drained from his face so fast it was visible live. He walked away without answering. By 2 o'clock, the footage had surfaced online. Not through rumor pages, through a formal legal release attached to a whistleblower filing and copied to local press. Clean, time-stamped, unedited. Viewers watched Gideon Voss hit a pregnant black nurse because she refused to move a child from a hospital bed. They watched staff freeze. They watched the administrator remove her instead of him. There are some stories money can survive. That was not one of them. The city turned on him. Sponsors paused partnerships. A charity gala removed his name. Former employees began speaking to reporters. A zoning official announced cooperation with investigators. Then came the detail that truly mattered. One of Gideon's flagship redevelopment deals had been financed through a labyrinth of debt that depended on confidence. Confidence disappeared by the hour. And still, Malik was not done. That evening, he took Ayanna to a tower on Michigan Avenue. Marble floors, bronze fixtures, silence priced into every inch. A private elevator carried them to the 37th floor, where a conference room overlooked the lake like a throne room for people who purchased outcomes. Inside sat 6 people. 2 attorneys, a forensic accountant, a woman from an investment firm Ayanna recognized from business news, an older man with a judge's posture, and at the far end of the table, Gideon Voss. For the first time, he looked small. Not physically, spiritually. His suit was perfect, his posture tried, but something had gone missing from his eyes, some private certainty that had carried him through other rooms and other abuses and other people too afraid to stop him. "This is insane," he snapped when Ayanna entered. "She's here now? What is this, humiliation theater?" Malik pulled out a chair for Ayanna. "No, theater needs fiction." Ayanna sat. The silver-haired man introduced himself as Elias Ward, lead trustee for the emergency debt conversion facility that now controlled distressed notes against multiple Voss entities. Ayanna did not understand every term. She did not need to. The meaning was plain. Gideon had spent years appearing untouchable while building his empire on leverage, vanity, intimidation, and the assumption that rules were for smaller people. Overnight, his lenders had been given enough reason to stop protecting him. Gideon looked at Malik. "Who are you?" Malik met his gaze without emotion. "The person she called after you forgot that public cruelty becomes evidence." Gideon laughed, but it cracked. "You think you've won because you embarrassed me?" Malik nodded toward the screens on the wall. They lit up at once. Emails, land deeds, foundation transfers, bribes disguised as consulting fees, a donor influence agreement tied to bed allocation preferences during high-profile admissions. Not theoretical corruption, documented corruption. Dates, amounts, signatures, names. Then the final clip played. The slap. No sound this time, just the motion. It was worse without sound. Gideon looked away first. Elias Ward folded his hands. "Mr. Voss, your choices are now limited." An attorney slid a packet toward him. Civil admissions. resignation instruments, asset controls, emergency charitable restructuring, permanent separation from hospital board influence, immediate public statement, cooperation clause. Gideon stared at the pages. "I'm not signing this." "You are," the attorney said. "Or you'll spend the next 48 hours learning how quickly parallel investigations become criminal referrals." Gideon turned to Ayanna. "You set this up." Ayanna's voice came out steady. "No, you did. Yesterday." For the first time, he had no answer. The meeting lasted another hour. Gideon argued, threatened, bargained, denied, sweated through his collar. In the end, he signed because men like Gideon always discover the truth too late. Power works beautifully until it meets accountability with receipts. When it was over, Ayanna stood to leave. Gideon spoke one last time, softer now. "What do you want?" Ayanna thought of Naomi Reed in that bed, Denise kneeling beside her in the hallway, Mercer's blank face, the nursery corner in her apartment, and every person ever told to stay quiet because someone richer needed comfort. "I want you to spend the rest of your life hearing the word no," she said. Then she walked out. 3 days later, labor began. Not dramatically, just a slow tightening at dawn while pale light leaked through the curtains. Ayanna sat up, breathed, timed the second contraction, and smiled despite herself because after everything else, this pain felt honest. By the time she reached the hospital, St. Matthew's looked different even from the parking lot. Reporters were gone. Donor banners had been removed. New security stood at the entrance. Leon Mercer's name had disappeared from the executive directory. Denise met her at the labor unit doors with tears in her eyes and a laugh in her throat. "Look at you, still the toughest woman in this building." Ayanna labored for 11 hours. Malik stayed mostly outside the room, sending food, making calls, appearing only when she asked. He did not hover. He understood presence better than performance. In the final hour, when fear clawed through exhaustion and Ayanna gripped the bedrail until her knuckles blanched, Denise leaned close and whispered, "Breathe. Your daughter is almost here." Daughter. The word steadied her. When the baby finally cried, the whole room changed shape. No speech can properly describe that sound when it belongs to you. It was tiny and furious and alive. They placed the baby against Ayanna's chest, warm and blinking at the world as if already suspicious of it. And Ayanna laughed through tears she did not hide this time. Every threat, every loss, every cold hallway from the past week shrank beneath the weight of 7 pounds and 6 ounces of undeniable future. She named her Nia. Later, when the room was quiet except for soft machine beeps and the breathing of a sleeping newborn, Malik stood near the doorway in a dark coat, holding a paper cup of coffee gone cold. He looked less like the man who had dismantled a billionaire and more like the boy who once promised a frightened foster sister that nobody would make her feel alone if he could help it. Ayanna looked up at him. "You went too far." He gave the smallest hint of a smile. "No, I went exactly far enough." She watched her daughter sleeping. "What happens now?" Malik leaned against the wall. Gideon resigned from everything this morning. 2 board members followed. His foundation has been placed under supervised restructuring. The state opened inquiries on the housing contracts. The hospital agreed to independent oversight for patient equity and donor influence. Naomi Reed is still in her room, and nobody will ever try to buy that room again. Ayanna closed her eyes for one brief second and let the relief move through her. "And me?" she asked. Malik placed a folder on the bedside table. Inside was a contract. Director of Patient Advocacy and Clinical Equity, St. Matthew's Regional. Guaranteed salary increase, full benefits, maternity protection, independent reporting line to the new oversight board. Ayana looked up sharply. What is this? Malik shrugged once. A job for the woman who already did it without a title. She stared at the offer, then at him. Did you buy this hospital? No. A beat. Not all of it. For the first time in days, Ayana laughed from somewhere real. A week later, the public apology aired. Not the thin kind lawyers draft to survive headlines, the kind that costs something. The interim board chair stood at a podium inside the hospital atrium and admitted that donor influence had distorted policy, that a violent act against an employee had been mishandled, that retaliation had been attempted, and that Ayana Brooks had shown more integrity in one hallway than the institution around her had shown in years. He announced a maternal safety fund, a patient fairness review unit, and protections for whistleblowers. He did not say Gideon Voss's name until the end. By then, it no longer sounded impressive. People online called it justice. They were wrong. Justice would have meant it never happened. What arrived instead was consequence, and sometimes consequence is the only language powerful people leave behind when the rest has been exhausted. Months passed. Winter loosened its grip on the city. Nia learned to focus her eyes. Ayana learned how little sleep a human being can survive on when love keeps interrupting exhaustion with meaning. She returned to work on a reduced schedule, not to the exact same floor, but close enough to smell the familiar antiseptic and hear the same stubborn machines insisting on life. Some employees could not meet her eyes out of embarrassment. Others hugged her too long. The young nurse on orientation, the one who had frozen that day, approached her one afternoon and whispered, "I'm sorry I didn't say anything." Ayana looked at her, really looked at the fear she still carried like a bruise, and shook her head. "Next time," she said gently, "say something for the person after me." The nurse cried. So did Ayana later, alone in the supply closet, because healing is rarely elegant and almost never linear. As for Gideon Voss, the world kept shrinking around him. One magazine called him a cautionary tale in custom tailoring. Another said his greatest mistake was believing private wealth could still control public shame. Several properties were sold. 2 projects were canceled. 1 former partner sued. An inquiry became 3. He was photographed entering a federal building without security, without swagger, without even the old habit of looking irritated by ordinary people. He looked like a man discovering that silence feels different when it no longer protects you. Ayana never spoke to him again. She did not need to. The last time she saw his face was on a muted television in the hospital waiting room, while Nia slept against her shoulder under a yellow blanket. Gideon was being questioned by reporters he could no longer ignore. His mouth moved, the captions rolled. Nobody in the waiting room cared. A father heating formula looked away first. A child changed the channel. The world, once forced to make space for him, had finally learned how to continue without his permission. Ayana kissed the top of her daughter's head and smiled, because that was the thing power had never understood. The loudest person in the room is not always the one who changes the ending. Sometimes it is the woman who stands between a child and a bed. Sometimes it is the nurse who says no when no one else will. Sometimes it is the brother who waits until the truth is documented before he moves. And sometimes it is a newborn girl sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms while whole empires crumble in the background, too late to matter. People later tried to simplify the story. They said a billionaire slapped the wrong woman. They said he messed with the wrong family. They said he underestimated who was connected to whom. But Ayana knew those versions were easier because they let everyone else off the hook. The truth was harder. A powerful man struck a pregnant nurse because he believed a system would protect him. And the truly frightening part was that, at first, the system did. That was why the story stayed. Not because of Gideon's fall, because of the hallway. Because every viewer who had ever been ignored by someone richer, dismissed by someone louder, or cornered by someone protected, recognized the expression on Ayana's face after the slap. Not weakness, not surrender. The devastating stillness of a person deciding that dignity would outlive humiliation if she let it. And it did. On a warm Sunday in late April, Ayana took Nia to the hospital garden outside the pediatric wing. Naomi Reed was there too, thinner but recovering, chasing soap bubbles with a wobbling laugh while her mother filmed on a phone with a cracked case. Denise sat on a bench nearby, pretending not to cry. The fountain splashed quietly. Wind moved through the magnolia trees. For a moment, the place looked less like a hospital and more like proof that mercy can still exist after institutions fail. Malik arrived 10 minutes late, carrying coffee and a stuffed elephant too expensive for a baby who would probably chew the tag first. He handed Ayana the cup, nodded toward Naomi in the sunlight, and said, "This is what the paperwork was for." Ayana smiled. "You mean all those terrifying little signatures?" He looked offended. "Some of those signatures were elegant." She laughed softly, then watched Naya blink up at the sky from her stroller as if the clouds were performing for her personally. "You know," Ayana said, "for a while I thought that hallway was the worst day of my life." Malik sat beside her. "And now?" Ayana took a slow sip of coffee, warm and bitter and real. "Now I think it was the day everything false got exposed." Malik glanced at her, then at the baby, then at the children's wing where sunlight flashed across glass that once reflected the wrong priorities. "That's usually how rebuilding begins," he said. "Not with noise, not with revenge speeches, not with dramatic promises. With exposure, with a witness, with one person who refuses to move when moving would be easier." Across the garden, Naomi tripped, caught herself, and kept running. Her mother laughed. Denise finally gave up and wiped her eyes openly. Naya yawned in her stroller like the whole city had exhausted itself for her entertainment. Ayana leaned back on the bench and let the ordinary beauty of that moment settle over the parts of her that still remembered fluorescent lights, legal threats, and rain on a parking deck. The scar inside her had not vanished, but it had changed shape. It no longer felt like proof of what power could do. It felt like proof of what power had failed to finish. And somewhere far from the garden, in offices and courtrooms and boardrooms where names rose and fell by the quarter, people still discussed the collapse of Gideon Voss. Analysts pointed to debt. Reporters pointed to corruption. Former allies pointed anywhere but themselves. Only Ayana knew the whole truth in a single sentence. A child needed a bed. A nurse said no. A billionaire forgot that some people can be quiet and still impossible to move. That was the beginning. And for every person who has ever stood in a hallway with their heart racing, their future trembling, and their dignity tested by someone convinced they could buy the ending, maybe that is enough to remember. Not every rescue comes with sirens. Not every battle looks heroic while you are living it. And not every empire falls because of some grand war. Sometimes it falls because one decent woman, already carrying the weight of another life, refused to step aside for a man who had never once been told he was smaller than the truth.